is currently a full professor of sociology at UP Diliman, University of the Philippines. Dr. Bautista is also a former dean of the UP College of Social Sciences and Philosophy, and also an executive director of the UP Center for Integrative and Development Studies. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to present to you Dr. Maria Cynthia Rose Bautista.
Thank you, Ernie, for a very generous introduction. Well, I'm just in Wisconsin for one semester, and I'm here to fulfill the commitment of the University of the Philippines in St. Norbert's College here, because there is an agreement between us to help them with their Philippine. They have a course on Philippine society and culture, which is very strange to me because I can't understand why you would have a course in De Pere, Wisconsin. But anyway, their only country study is really the Philippines, and they have China and South and East Asia, but as a region. But they have a Philippine society and culture. So we are here every year. We send someone here, and they send someone to the Philippines. But I think it's really because of the network of friends. Many of us, Filipinos in the Philippines, Filipino Americans in the US, and overseas Filipino workers scattered across the globe are often disturbed by a puzzling reality. Why the Philippines, the only colony the United States ever possessed, and at the age of modernity at that, the symbol of what it was to be modern in Asia in the late 1950s and 1960s, when its economy was only second to Japan's, and when Asians, Thais, Taiwanese, Vietnamese, among others, enrolled in our universities to acquire skills in fields like agriculture and management, accounting and management, that they applied to their countries with astounding success. Why our country remains bogged down with 20th century problems, and why it now lags behind our Asian neighbors in the 21st century, born immediately after World War II. Growing up in the late 1950s and the 1960s, our generation was told in our elementary and high school years that we were very privileged to be getting an excellent education in our own country. There was no reason to doubt this then. At that time, when Filipinos began migrating in significant numbers to the United States and Europe, in response to the demand for nurses, doctors, and other professionals, classmates whose families migrated would write us to our teachers to say that they felt equal to, if not superior to, their American classmates in terms of what I was forced to complete her work, and in the process see for myself how terribly neglected public education has been, especially in areas far from urban centers, and especially in the autonomous region of Muslim Mindanao. Three more observations would make me feel the urgency of addressing our 20th century education problems. The first was an accidental exposure to South Korea's national efforts to gear up for the 21st century through human resource development. While preparing the synthesis for the first plenary session of a UNESCO Conference on Education and Lifelong Learning in Busan, the Republic of Korea, I was amazed and very much impressed by the Korean government's resolute efforts to use human resource development to propel and sustain its economy. This slide reveals how deliberately the Korean government invested in basic, vocational, technical, and higher education at different points in that country's development. Note that from the 1990s onwards, it paid even closer attention to the quality of primary, secondary, and tertiary education in anticipation, and this was the language that early, in anticipation of an expanded knowledge society and the innovation-led strategy that it would demand. More recently, lifelong learning cities that provide facilities for formal, non-formal, and informal learning to citizens of all ages have sprouted, and I had the chance to visit some of them. What was even more amazing was the designation in 2001 of a Deputy Prime Minister for Education and National Human Resource Development, which is a more powerful office than an ordinary cabinet post, and the legislation a year later of the National Human Resource Development Act. What I saw in South Korea reminded me of Singapore's bid to become the Center for Learning and the Arts in Asia, which amused our circle of Southeast Asian colleagues in the 1980s when the Singaporean social scientists in our midst first announced it in our workshop. The other Southeast Asians, including me, were actually snickering behind her back. How could Singapore ever even talk about this? At the time, we did not imagine that it would. Throughout the time that I would go to Vietnam, which was every 2 or 3 months, you would see Vietnam and you would see Hanoi changing, and a part of me would cry a bit because I realized that Vietnam will overtake the Philippines if it is not yet overtaking it. At that time, the Philippines was overtaken by Thailand, and maybe 10 years earlier, Thailand was just like Bangkok, was just like Manila, and Thailand was just like the Philippines. The Vietnamese are already winning. Their stance towards their country's development and their deep love of nation, that our colleagues claimed would make them fight any force that encroaches into their space, whether it is China, Russia, or the United States, accounts for the value of science and scientists in the minds of the country's general public. In fact, it is this nationalism that I think the United States underestimated or did not fully understand. It also explains why at the height of the US-Vietnam War, they continued to translate the best scientific books and articles into Vietnamese. No wonder they are topping the mathematics Olympiads. That the mission for scientists and professionals is clearly passed on to the younger generation is manifested in their performance in international scholarship competitions. In the Asian Scholarship Foundation's review of humanities and social science proposals from some young Southeast Asian scholars of which we were a part, the Vietnamese applicants used to be given affirmative action just a few years ago. Now they're among the best applicants. This remarkable change resonates with the experience of Vietnamese students in our own Asian Institute of Management, which is also slowly deteriorating in relation to other Asian management programs in the region. So how does the Philippines compare to Asia? Recent comparisons in the 2008 World Bank data set of the country's primary net enrollment and completion rates with those of other countries in Asia Pacific reveal a shocking finding. This is really very shocking to me. That Cambodia and Laos have higher primary net enrollment and completion rates than us. The 2 other Malay countries in Southeast Asia have achieved primary enrollment and completion rates that are much higher than ours. And these were the countries we led in we brought them together. We wanted to be the Malay sub-region, but they're better than us, in terms of at least completion rates and primary rates. While Laos and Cambodia have higher dropout rates than the Philippines, comparative data reveal as well that our country has the highest proportion of dropouts compared to our other Southeast Asian neighbors. What about expenditure per student share of the gross domestic product? As expected, the Philippines clearly lags behind for both primary and secondary education. Data on public expenditure for per pupil in tertiary education is not as readily available, but I can wager with my life that Philippine expenditures may be even lower. By now, the numbers are well known. Out of 100 children who enter grade 1, 65 finally complete the full elementary cycle of 6 years, and we lack 1 year compared to the number of years of education here. Of these 65, only 58 go to high school, of whom only 42 graduate 4 years later. Only 15% of grade 6 pupils cross the 75% mastery level in the National Achievement Test, while only 1% of high school students did so. We're higher than South Africa, Ghana, and Botswana, but lower than Indonesia, and definitely trails behind our other Southeast Asian neighbors, Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, and Singapore. Even our science high schools, notably the Philippine Science High School, attained mathematics scores that were higher than the international mean, but at the level only of the average scores of Taiwan, Korea. In science, its performance was even more lackluster. It was lower than the international mean and was only 1 point higher than the average of Botswana and a point lower than the average science score of Indonesia.